Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of the Barbell Effect. This is Gavin here with Zach and Katy again for another episode. How we doing, guys?
You said back for another episode twice in that same sentence.
Oh, fuck me.
It's okay.
What?
We're all human.
Oh man, I didn't even notice that.
I honestly didn't either until Zach pointed it
Yeah,
out.
Katy can cut that part out.
It is what it is.
Is that just going to be the trend? Katy can cut it out. She's got time.
Once
She's
we're
got
rich
nothing
and
better to do.
Once we're rich and famous, we won't have to worry about it. We'll hire an editor.
I know. I was just thinking about that, how much easier our life would be if we could just have full-time editing.
Yep.
But it's okay. I honestly don't mind editing the audio only. For some reason, I don't like editing the video. It's weird. I don't know why. It just seems like more work to me, but it is what it is.
Cool.
Depends.
Honestly, I am not doing so hot all of a sudden. I know you asked Gavin how we're doing. I've got the lady cramps that just smacked me in the face about 10 minutes ago before we started recording.
Go take some Tylenol.
I'll take it after we're recording. I don't feel like getting up.
Yeah.
And I suddenly just got very warm. Like that happens. Like I woke up sweating this morning, and that only happens right before.
Yeah, the room was cold last night, so.
Yeah, I definitely woke up sweating.
Yeah.
I do that every day.
Wake up sweating?
Yeah.
No, he's on his period every day.
Yeah.
I hope not. That'd be awful.
It's that guy time of the month.
Yeah, it just hit me like right before we started recording, and I got really hot, and my stomach just started like feeling like it's being squeezed on the inside. Not my stomach, but my uterus.
That's how my stomach is, because I haven't eaten since like 10.
That's how my uterus is.
Health as well. All right. So this week, you guys get the pleasure of us talking about a deload week. So we're going to cover all things deload. What is it? How do you do a deload week? When do you know that you need a deload week? And just kind of the benefits and the purpose of it in your training for your specific goals as well.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, so pretty much a deload is really just a 1 week duration of reducing your overall like intensity of training, your volume, basically just taking it a little bit easier than you normally do, not going as hard, not going to failure, maybe not using as much weight, just giving your muscles, your central nervous system, just taking a quick little rest to let it catch up and recover from all of the hard and intense training you have been doing prior.
Yeah, that was a really good explanation of a deload week. Now, deload week differentiates itself from an off week, like a complete off week, a diet break. Those are very different things. So this episode, we're going to be specifically talking about deloads. So exactly what Zach just explained. So there are definitely outliers and other methods of taking a break from training, but this will cover specifically deload weeks.
And every person who does a deload week, along with everything we talk about, there's not one size fits all when it comes to doing a deload. So your deload is not going to look the same as your best friend's deload or the people you see on Instagram. Everybody's a little bit different, and it just depends on your specific goals and honestly whether or not you even need to do one. A lot of times it's not even for rest and recovery as much as it could be just psychological recovery. Say you've been going hard in the gym for 10 weeks in a row, and you've been sticking really tightly to your plan, and you just need a week where it's you just need to take a little bit of time off, whether that's a complete rest week or you're just doing, like Zach said, and Katy said, just less weight and less reps, so on and so forth, some combination of them. it's just taking that time so you can relax a little bit more and not worry so much about the gym. And it can be really beneficial for a lot of people, especially in that instance that they're really grinding.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the biggest ways that you can tell if you need a deload week, and the biggest purpose is to help reduce that fatigue. So if you are somebody who has been hitting the gym really hard for weeks on end, and you realize you're just super fatigued, you're not making progress in the gym, you've either become stagnant in your progress or even your progress has reduced slightly, then you kind of know it's time for a deload week. And the purpose of that is to kind of give you that refresher so that when you do hit hard on your training again after deload, you can continue making that progress that you need to. And the purpose of a deload versus just taking a week off completely is, one, it kind of helps you stay fresh to jump right back into your hard weeks of training after deload, but also it helps you conserve the gains and the progress that you have made up until that point as well.
Yeah. And
Yeah. Go ahead.
And how often you do a deload, or how often you don't do a deload, or how much of a deload you do, like how much of a reduction in intensity or volume that you're doing, really depends on your recovery up to that point, and also like how hard you're training, because training is a type of stressor on your body, and that kind of tends to accumulate, especially if you're training very intensely. That's what it was. For some reason in my mind, it was some other variation of that word that didn't sound right. So I don't
Words
want to
are
say
hard.
it. Yeah. But that it tends to accumulate over time. And it's going to accumulate a lot more if your recovery isn't great. So like, say you have a lot of other stressors in life, such as reduced sleep, like social stressors, like issues with like work or family or something that's just like weighing on you, like psychologically causing stress. If you're not eating enough to support recovery, you're not eating enough protein to help with recovery, you're not eating very nutrient dense foods, and your body doesn't have that adequate amounts of nutrients that you should be getting, that can all impact your recovery, which then leads to more stress and more fatigue, especially if you're training more intensely. It's all going to add up, and there's a chance that if you're not allowing yourself to recover enough from your training, you're going to need deloads more frequently than if you are doing all those things correctly, getting enough sleep, eating properly, reducing other areas of stress in your life.
And somewhere to start when it comes to, trying to employ a deload, or wondering when you really feel like you should, as far as an objective measurement goes, if you track your progress in the gym and say you squat twice a week, or you squat once and then you do leg press later in the week, say you're supposed to hit 10 reps on Monday and the first squat, and then on Friday you're supposed to hit 10 reps of leg press. Say you hit only 9 or 8 reps on squat, and then so that's one day of you hitting less than what you were supposed to, or less than you did the week before. That's one day you're like, okay, well, I didn't do as well as I was supposed to do. We got to think of why. Is it, like kind of Zach said, are there different stressors in my life? Did my grandpa just die or something, and that's why I didn't hit this weight? Like any stressor like that, or do I have a big test coming up, something like that. But then you go later in the week and you hit legs again, and say you were supposed to hit 10 reps of leg press and you only hit 8 again, or something less than that. And you're like, okay, we're not doing as well as we were before. It might be time for a deload. That's kind of a good objective way of trying to find out when one should be employed. There's no, again, one size fits all when it comes to that, but the general accepted range for a lot of people in the bodybuilding community, they generally work maybe or do a deload about the 5th week of their cycle that they're doing. So they work out for 4 weeks and then they do a 5th week deload. That is by no means what you have to do, but it's just kind of the initial recommendation that a lot of people give.
Yeah, it's pretty common. But also with bodybuilding, I don't think deloads are as needed as training for something like powerlifting or some kind of more performance focused sport. Because like I know a lot of people that do bodybuilding, they train more intuitively, and so their volume and intensity kind of adjusts based on how they're feeling that day, which then is going to reduce the need for like planned deloads like every fifth week, like you said. So yeah, some people, I think it can be helpful for beginners to kind of maybe plan them in. But as you get more advanced with your training, you might find that you don't need them as often. So like if you're continuously improving and progressing, and on that fifth week, like you're still feeling great, recovery's been great, you've been doing everything well, and you have more reps, you're able to get closer to failure than the prior week, you really don't need to do a deload that week. You can just keep progressing. So yeah, like Gavin said, it can be helpful to kind of have that initial like kind of guideline at first, a recommendation to know about when you should take one, or it might be a good idea to, but also paying attention to like personal cues and like how you're feeling, how your training is going, and not looking at like one specific session to make that decision, because you could just be having an off day. So it's not the best idea to go based off that one day. But how is your progress going over the course of several training days? Are you regularly not able to hit the goal amount of reps or the goal weight that you've been trying to do, or that you have planned to do that day? And also, how's your recovery and everything doing? And also, how's your mindset, your energy? Looking at all of those different things that should help guide you to make that decision when it might be a good idea to deload.
So you're telling me there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah. And I'm telling you it depends too.
Oh my God.
You both brought up some really good topics, and even things that we could eventually branch off into other whole episodes too, because honestly, like Zach just said, is that all of these things they all intertwine, and they all determine kind of the course of action that you're going to take in your own journey. So a couple things that I wanted to expand on based on what these guys said. First of all, the stress aspect. I think a lot of people kind of focus on more so their physical being and not as much their mental being when it comes to any course of action in their journey, especially a deload. So a lot of times people will say, oh, well, I'm not experiencing stress from going to work out, that relieves my stress. But working out is still a stressor on your body. And this is a lot of the time, the reason why I have my clients pull back on something a little bit is if they're experiencing stress in work, relationships, anything that has to do with like psychological stress. Think about your stress as like a bucket of water, and every area of your life that stress can come from is like a drop in the bucket. And if your bucket is overflowing, it doesn't matter where that stress is coming from. It's going to overload your bucket, regardless of if you're dealing with like the stress of finding time to work out or meal prep, things like that, or if you're dealing more so with psychological stress from work or a family emergency or something along those lines. So it's really important. And I think an overarching theme with your entire journey is self-awareness, because if you do not build self-awareness throughout your journey, you're not going to know when to implement a deload week, when to keep training. And I think Zach did bring up a good point that it might be beneficial for you if you are a beginner listening to this to schedule deload weeks, so you kind of get an idea of where they might fit into your own journey, when your body feels like you need a deload week, and when it could be beneficial for your specific training and goals, whether it's training for hypertrophy, strength, fat loss, anything like that. I think that it could be really good for you to start planning that in and learning just how your body responds, because that is what your whole entire journey is about, is how your specific body responds to different things that you're implementing, whether it comes to diet or training, sleep, water intake, things like that. You have to know how your body responds so that you can react and decide which path and which direction to go on.
One of my favorite quotes from one of the doctors that I work with is weight training is the single greatest science experiment you will ever conduct in your entire life, because it is the most longitudinal N of one study that you have. People don't know what that means. It just means one subject, but you continuously evaluate what you are doing, what works, what doesn't work for you, what you like, what you don't like, and then you mold what your training is based upon that. And that's exactly kind of what Katy's saying there. You need to figure out when you even need to do a deload, like you both were just saying. And a lot of the research for hypertrophy states that as well. Like, it's not a necessary thing to do planned. It may be better to employ just as needed, especially on those days where you aren't feeling as good or something is going on in your life and the gym is just not a priority, or you want to make it less of a priority instead week, or say you are feeling certain aches and pains and it's like, okay, I need to stop lifting so much weight all the time and take a week where you just reduce the weight.
I think, can I insert a question here that I thought of? So specifically regarding deload weeks, I mean, you can apply this question or a similar question to other aspects too, but when specifically toying with the idea of a deload week or not, ask yourself if you're not making progress week to week, but you have that fear, like you're not implementing a deload week because maybe you fear of like losing gains, and you're somebody who didn't really know a lot about deload weeks, so you didn't know if you should implement one or not, or how to even go about it. Ask yourself, if you're not training to progress forward, what are you training for? And I'm not saying that you have to there is something to say about just going to the gym to maintain a certain level of fitness or a certain healthy lifestyle. But if you're not training to progress forward and to grow in some type of way, what are you training for? And if your answer is just like, well, I don't know, like I'm just training because I'm scared of like losing gains, or I'm training just to keep training, that's not always a good enough answer. And if you're somebody who is training for a certain purpose and you are finding the stagnancy or even regression in your training, then, and you ask yourself that question and you don't know the answer, then it might be time to implement a deload week, because it can actually help you take that time mentally and physically to refresh and give your body that much needed recovery so that you can hop back into training and actually start to see that progress, even with just 1 week of deload.
Yeah, something Dr. Mike Isertel said is like, by the end of your deload, especially if it's for psychological reasons that you just wanted to, take a little break from the gym, by the end of your deload, you should be like, I want to lift a fucking weight right now. I'm going to explode. Mm-hmm. Like, that is so true. I mean, we've all had those weeks where it's like, I have nothing in me right now. I don't want to go to the gym at all. And then, if say you do take a week off, by the end of it, you're like, okay, yep, ready to go. Want to go back to the gym. Come on. Monday can be here already.
And I think part of it too is not trying to hyper focus on taking deloads and like trying to be too like optimal in that sense. Because there's a pretty good chance, if you're trying to do the most optimal thing and in this case taking a deload, you might not even need that deload, and you could be setting yourself behind a little bit by a week by doing one when you really don't need it. And I found that out when over the past couple of years. So like me personally with deloads, I really don't do them anymore. I rarely do them. And like over the past couple of years, when I started getting more into the like science-based, evidence-based side of training, I would like schedule a deload every 4th week, and then I do it. But like my training was perfectly fine nearly every time. I was still progressing week to week. I didn't really have any problems, so I really didn't need to be doing that. And I think that was kind of setting me back a little bit, because over the past like probably 6 months, I've changed my training style to I decreased volume. I used to do a lot of volume, but now I only do like two working sets per exercise, and I take them to pretty much failure every time. And occasionally I do partial reps afterwards. And since I decreased that volume, I'm still doing enough intensity to where I'm making progress, but it's not too much to where I'm under recovering. So I don't need to take an extra recovery period as often. And part of that too is I train intuitively. So some days where I'm not feeling the greatest, I don't want to call it a deload because I'm not significantly reducing anything. I'm basically maybe just going back and leaving an extra rep or two in reserve compared to where I might normally do it. I'm still using the same weights. I'm maybe not trying to push past the week before. I'm just trying to do the same thing as the week before. So I wouldn't really call that a deload, but at the same time, it's not like doing too much to where I'm not recovering from.
I would
so
say
it's kind of intuitive.
I would say it's similar to a deload. It may not be to the extent that, the idea, the general definition of a deload is, but you're still taking load off, even if it's just a few reps, for the pure sake of, I want it to be a little bit easier this session. But I'd call it a version of a deload at least.
I think this is the sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, again, it would probably vary more so for someone who's training for strength more so than Zach is, because they're going to be lifting heavier for lower repetitions, and that can weigh on your joints, ligaments, tendons, so on and so forth, in regard to injury prevention and just overall feelings of fatigue and achiness, so on and so forth, compared to bodybuilding, which is Zach's primary goal, where it's not as heavy of weights, higher repetitions, looking for more of that molecular change within the muscles so you can essentially get bigger. But yeah, just some differences. Go ahead.
I thought you were done. I'm sorry. You like paused and then you were like, yeah, okay. Are you done?
I have a tendency to keep talking.
Well, you'll pause and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to insert. And then you're like, so yeah. And I'm like, okay, he's not done. Because like when you're talking on a podcast, you got to try to, and I'm going to cut this part out, but you got to try to insert yourself where you can.
Insert it.
I'll insert it wherever I want.
Force it into submission. No, so
Katie's telling me to insert it.
Sorry, Dad.
Firm grasply. Or grasp firmly.
Firm grasply. Yeah.
Firmly grasp it in your hand.
Okay. You got to take all of this with a grain of salt, because you have to understand that all of us have been lifting for years now, and I probably am the least seasoned lifter, even though I have been lifting for 5 to 6 years. They've been lifting and in their journey for a lot longer than I have, but still 5 and 6 years is probably a lot longer than a lot of people listening to this are starting off as. So you just have to understand that we're at a point where, and we're still learning and growing. I mean, we're evolving every day. And the more we learn, the more we realize like we don't know about things, even when it comes to ourselves. So it's such a learning process and a lifelong learning process. And your body does change over time too. So things might need to be adjusted differently as time progresses than maybe you used to do years back. So you just have to understand that what Zach is doing is very different from what Gavin's doing, which is very different from what I'm doing, and so on and so forth. So you got to take everything we say when we're talking about our own personal preferences. It might be something for you to try and see if it works for you, but you also have to know, like, just because we do something doesn't mean you're going to try it and it's going to work for you. So just take everything we say in terms of that with a grain of salt. Our purpose here is definitely to educate and to give insight onto what we do and how we apply it to our lives and our clients and patients and whoever we're working with. But you just, the key here is learning.
It depends.
Zach, I'm going to ban you.
I tried to use a different phrase today.
Yeah,
not
one size fits all.
Yep.
That's just a different way of saying it depends. It's like the MLMs, instead of doing a detox, they're reterming it as
it's a
recharge.
Yeah.
Reset, recharge.
Shake your brains out pill.
But also, I do want to touch on a point here that if you are new to lifting, more than likely, you are not at a point yet where you are pushing yourself hard enough to implement a deload week. And kind of like Zach said, if you are a beginner, it might be a good idea to start scheduling them here or there, like every 6 to 8 weeks, you know, if you feel like you're pushing yourself hard, just to give yourself a little break and see kind of what a deload week looks like to you. But also, deload weeks are not easy in terms of the weight that you're lifting. They should feel a lot easier than your hard training weeks, but mentally they are not easy, because you do go into the gym and you feel like you're doing nothing and you're like, man, I just want to push some fucking weight. Like, this feels useless. It's not useless. So like I said, it's hard to do a deload week because you just want to go in and you want to keep lifting. You feel like you're losing all your gains. And I can tell you, you're not. But if you are new to lifting, my first piece of advice for you when it comes to learning to implement a deload week is first learn how to actually push yourself hard. Because I think a lot of times people think, oh yeah, my muscles are starting to burn, like, I guess I'm pushing myself. But if you're not like really struggling on those last couple reps, like, most likely you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough. And it does take some time to learn that you actually can go further than what you think you can. And so I think you do need to learn first how to really fucking push yourself in the gym and like push some weight. And first, before that, you know, obviously before you start lifting super heavy, like, you're going to be working on form. So it is a really long process. And most likely in the beginning, you won't even really need a deload week. But kind of like we said, if you want to start implementing them to see what they're like, and so that you can become aware of like when your body might need them, then that could be beneficial for you. But first, you need to learn how to actually train hard before you can implement a deload week, in my opinion.
Yeah, a lot of times I see people in the gym, and even with new clients, when I start them out who are new to training, like, first, the people that I see in the gym, a lot of times they barely look like they're struggling. Like, they get to that point where they look like they're starting to struggle, and that's when they end their set. And if you're regularly doing that, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you probably aren't going to you're not pushing yourself hard enough to where you're might be starting to impair recovery if you're not doing all the other lifestyle parts correctly. And especially with new people, I don't think they do go intense enough at all. And that's a good thing, because when they do start going intense, they start doing the exercise wrong and risk injury. So that's kind of what we're talking about. We don't want you to push super hard initially. We want you to learn the movement, understand how it should feel, and how to use the muscles that you're trying to work and maintain proper form, and then increase and go from there. So like, your training sessions are going to look different than what our training sessions look like. And that's perfectly okay. We were all there when we first started too, but you might not need it right away, because chances are you're probably not training hard enough if you just started.
Yeah, if you're in the gym and you are, you know, still working with like just the bar or bands or body weight, like, most likely you don't need a deload week. Now, sometimes everyone does need a little bit of a mental break. And if you've been really working at it, really consistent with the gym to get in there and work on your form and learn how to lift, like, yeah, give yourself a bit of a mental break. It's not going to ruin all the progress you've made. But we do want to emphasize that it is really important. Like, yeah, of course you want to eventually work up to lifting super heavy, but everybody is like subjective view of heavy is different. Because when you're first starting to lift, like when I first started getting in the gym, the 45-pound bar was super heavy. And now that's like my warm up. So it is really subjective. So if you feel like you're really pushing yourself and you're training close to failure for you, then yeah, implementing a deload week here and there. But I gotta say, I think it was 2, maybe 3 years into my lifting journey before I even implemented a deload week, because I mean, when I first started lifting, I didn't even know what a deload week was. So, you know, by the time I learned what it was and what it meant and how to do it, I was lifting a decent amount to where I could implement one here or there. And there have been different times in different training phases where I have implemented a deload week more frequently or less frequently, depending on my training. For a while now, I haven't really needed one because honestly, like I think I mentioned this in one of the first episodes, like right now I'm in a period of life where like my business and like the podcast and everything is at the forefront of my priorities. So there's some weeks where, yes, I even miss training days sometimes. And like I've missed a day here or there in the past weeks. I mean, there was even a week, like a couple weeks back, where I didn't get to the gym at all. I still tried to walk and do mobility routines and stuff, but I didn't make it in the gym. So I'm not going to purposefully implement a deload week if I'm not even hitting like all of my hard training sessions to the point where I'm not even going to be like lacking recovery or getting to that point of fatigue accumulation over time. So it just really all depends on where you are at in life too, because you're going to have different things in life happening. And if you know that you're not even getting to the gym enough times, like maybe you need to work on the reason why you're not before you're even implementing a deload week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good example of where, again, where you might not be training hard enough where you need a deload, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not needed at that point. So you don't need to worry about doing it. But I wanted to touch on one other thing for the people who have been training very hard and struggle with taking deloads because just the mental side of it, not wanting to lose out on anything. You don't have to decrease your weight to do a deload. You can keep your top set the exact same, just cut the amount of reps you do by like half. So you're still using that weight. You're just not going as intense. You're pulling the intensity back. That's still a deload and giving yourself a chance to recover, while you're still able to maintain using that weight, and your body's still going to be used to that weight for the next week when you get back into it. Another thing you could do is maybe you do 3 sets to near failure. Maybe you cut that down to 1 or 2 sets per exercise. So you're still cutting your volume back, but you're still keeping that intensity there, which is then still going to allow you to have some recovery. So like you don't have to like cut your weight back significantly. You can cut back your just the intensity of your training while keeping that weight the same.
It's something that I like to employ with my training, almost like a hybrid version of that. So I generally take a deload kind of on an as needed basis, but it generally lands around the 7th to 9th week of a training block. But what I generally like to do is for more heavy compound lifts, so the bench squat, if I'm doing overhead pressing, or maybe even, RDLs, just heavier movements in general, I should say. I'll cut the weight on those exercises. It won't be by 50%. It'll probably be a little bit higher than that, but I will cut the reps. So if I'm doing those, I generally do just 3 sets of 5 repetitions. But for, the single joint movements that are they're smaller muscles. So like say bicep curls, for instance, unless my arm is specifically bothering me, I've got one bad arm. For people who don't know, I broke it back in the day and I had some pretty extensive surgeries done. So if it's bothering me, then I will lower the weight with, bicep curls, tricep extensions, anything like that. But if not, then I will keep the same weight, and I'll generally just do 3 sets of lower repetitions than I'm used to doing. So kind of like Zach said, that way you're still subjecting your muscles to that same weight. So you're most likely not going to lose any strength, but you will, you'll also be offloading a decent amount of the volume. So it'll allow, the ligaments, tendons, so on and so forth to feel better. by the end of your, by the end of your deload week.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to plug coaching here for a second, because it's truly beneficial, especially in this case, because if you are somebody who, now I might touch on my specific niche here, but if you're somebody who's newer to lifting, you're just starting to feel out what strength training feels like, you have a goal of, like I said here, I'm going to touch on my specific niche. If your goal is specifically like, I want to lose body fat, but I want to get stronger, I want to feel confident, I want to like build muscle as well to get more of a lean look, then it might be best to get some guidance in the beginning to figure out how to do all this stuff. And like, honestly, coaching helps out a lot with building that self-awareness, because as a coach, I pick up on things on a week-to-week basis that are kind of trending for my clients where they might not see that within themselves. But also coaching helps you be able to track in your check-ins things that might be consistently happening week to week that I can help you navigate, or a coach could help you navigate. But specifically with my clients, I know that there are some things that they wouldn't have even picked up on that they were doing or needing to work on without the coaching guidance. And so this goes for a deload week too. Like if somebody is in the mindset, kind of like Zach said, where you're struggling to take a deload week, and for my specific clients, it would be because they are afraid that if they don't get into the gym or continue like their cardio sessions and kind of drop all of that, then they're going to lose they're going to not continue to lose body fat or to like lose weight. That is their fear. So it's like, if you are somebody in that, it might be good, or like in that mindset, it might be good to get somebody to help you in the beginning, just learn like, how does this all work? Like, how do I push myself in the gym? How do I know when my body needs a deload week? And having a coach could tell you those telltale signs of, hey, like you're consistently rating your stress an 8 out of 10. And because of this, I've noticed also that there's kind of a correlation with you not being able to like increase weight or reps or make progress in the gym, and you're just kind of been stagnant for a couple of weeks. So maybe we do need to kind of pull the reins back, and maybe that's not a full on deload week, but maybe it's, hey, let's start with taking out your cardio sessions and focusing on just your lifts. Maybe it is pulling back the reins fully. It just kind of depends on the person, but just having that guidance in the beginning, it's something that I really wish I had. I definitely had Gavin to help me, but obviously like I'm very different, and he wasn't like an official coach. Like we were just both in college. So like we were kind of learning it along the way too. And he was still learning how to do things for himself. And so that was very different than what my body needed too. So
I look back and at some of the things that I taught you, in the beginning, just like we've talked about previously, but there's so much bullshit that I was pumping into your head that I think back to now. And I'm like, oh man,
honestly,
but that's how you learn.
Honestly, anything was better than the banded like glute kickbacks and bridges that I was relying on, or the 7-minute ab workouts to get a 6-pack. So
kind of jumping off of your comment and then back to what I said about the world's greatest science experiment being your own weight training journey. It's a lot easier to conduct said experiment if you have someone else overseeing the whole process and taking your feelings out of the the day-to-day. Obviously both Zach and Katy, and even myself with people I work with, I take into account how they feel, but they are going to have an objective measure of how things are going and what you can and cannot do. So they'll be able to help you a lot more than just doing things on your own.
This is exactly what Zach did for me when I was training for my first show. Like, I don't think I would have ever gotten to my first show without having that objective eye, like especially when it came to like progress photos and stuff, because there's just things that you don't see. Like, you're very subjective about yourself. A lot of times people are a lot harder on themselves. And I think it just really helped having that accountability and that objective eye, because I would have looked at the photos week to week and probably like torn myself apart about certain things, whereas he was focusing on something completely different in the coach's eye.
Yeah. I'm going to kind of go off that too. So yeah, having that like external view is very helpful, because even if you know the right things you should be doing in your mind, it's still going to play games and kind of say like, I'm not making progress, I'm not doing anything. And that's just the way that your mind works. Whereas when you have that external view, they're looking at everything and they don't have your personal brain telling them, but what about this thing? What about this thing? That doesn't matter. That's really just kind of your brain kind of pulling yourself back a little bit. And so like I remember like working with you specifically, there were times where you'd kind of start feeling down and feel like you weren't making progress or anything. And I'd then pull up your training and be like, look at the progression in training we've made since from this time to like 2 months ago. Or you'd be like looking at your pictures and be like, I'm not making progress. I'm not making progress. And then I'd show you a side by side of a month or two prior, and there's a clear night and day difference. So yeah, it's nice to have that external viewpoint to prevent you from holding yourself back.
Yeah, and it's so funny that it comes full circle, because that's exactly what I do with my clients now. They're like, I feel like I'm making zero progress, and I'm like, well, this is the first month that you've hit all 4 lifts for 4 weeks in a row, so I would consider that progress. And like you said, side by side photos, things like that. The weight doesn't, or the scale doesn't tell the whole picture. And especially with my specific girls, very scale focused, they come to be very scale focused. So to just show them like, hey, yeah, the scale might not be saying what your progress is actually done, but look at these photos from like 6 months ago when we started. And they'd be like, oh my gosh, I guess I didn't realize. Yeah, because you're looking at yourself every day in the mirror. Like you don't see those changes over a 6-month period. You're just looking at yourself day to day.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, that could go way off topic, but it could be helpful to have that like objective eye.
And speaking of that, I think that's a great place to kind of cut this episode, because that's going into next week's topic of self-image. So I think we've done a pretty good job covering deloads for this episode. So we're going to cut it here. Do you guys have anything else to say?
I wanted to speak quickly about deloads in regard to people in athletics. It's a different world compared to just people who are in the gym. And a lot of times people who are in the gym are also people who play a sport on the side. That is something that you want to take into account when determining whether or not you want to do a deload. A lot of athletes don't even know what deloads are. And a lot of strength and conditioning coaches, at least from my experience, don't employ them often because, frankly, summer strength programs and during the year strength programs, they're not long enough for people to even consider a deload. But you're putting your body under a lot of stress throughout your season, throughout your practices and games and matches, so on and so forth. Pay attention to how you feel. It's totally okay if you need to take a week where you do less, if you have the opportunity to. So say I used to work with cheerleaders a lot, and they would grind 7 days a week, hours and hours and hours of stunting. And they had a lot of chronic injuries, a lot of them low back pain, knee pain, so on and so forth from hours and hours of stunting. And then they'd go lift on top of that. That's a lot of volume, and it's not easy to quantify how much volume you're actually putting in when you're, at a practice. You can say a number of repetitions of a certain stunt that you do, or say you're a football player, certain repetitions of a certain drill. But just know that it's okay every now and again to take a little bit of time off, or take a little bit of time, a week's worth, and just do half of what you've been doing, because your body will thank you for that throughout the long run. And you'll probably avoid a lot of issues. I don't have any research that focuses on stuff like this. I don't believe there's been any done on athletes specifically, but looking at your training as an athlete, you can absolutely take deload weeks if you're able to with your practice schedule.
I just wanted to say something about not deload topic related, but if you're listening to this, please, please, please share us with your friends and family, either in conversation or sharing the link directly through message, because as a small business and a smaller podcast, our biggest beneficial means of marketing is your word of mouth, your reviews, your recommendations. So please take the time if you can. And if you enjoy the things that we talk about, please do so. But also please reach out to us. Our email is in the show notes to ask us any questions or suggest any topics that you would like to learn about for your specific journey. I know sometimes it can be hard to ask questions when you're like, I don't really know what to ask questions about, but it could be a general topic that we can break down and ask you further questions to get an idea of what you want to hear and learn about. So please take the time to do that so that we can help produce things that actually are beneficial for your life and your journey.
Tell your friends at the gym.
That too. And if you have any questions, like specifically for each of us, like all our Instagrams are also in the show notes. So like if you want to ask any of us specifically something, or if you want to work with one of us specifically, you can always head to our Instagrams and message any of us directly.
And if you don't want to work with any of us specifically, like you don't have the means to do that, honestly, like Katy said, share the podcast, share our stuff on social media, like, subscribe, everything like that. It means more than you guys know to us. So please, just, if you don't have the means to work with any of us, but you want to support us somehow, those are some really good options.
Yeah, sounds good. Catch y'all next week. As always, thank you so much for tuning in with us. For more free content and to stay in touch, be sure to give us a follow. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok, homerun_fit for Katy, Gavin_Geltz for Gavin, and Z_Chomicki for Zach.
Also, feel free to email us with any questions or topics you'd like to hear on the pod at thebarbelleffectpod@gmail.com. We'll be sure to link all of this in the show notes for you as well.
Lastly, if you like this episode, please leave a rating and review so others who can benefit from what we offer can find us. Until next week, keep moving, don't eat like an asshole, and fucking stay hydrated.